As someone who's a formidable sales coach, what are some of the things that you do to get the very best of people and try and get them to stay in that multiplier mode?
So how you keep somebody a multiplier is actually go to bat for them, actually learn and care about what's going on in their life. If somebody's worked for you for 2 years and you don't know their significant other's names, their kids, their dogs, those are problems. Your job as a sales leader in 2025, you better get right on psychology and empathy and actually care about people and treat them a bit like a family. Because if you're a spreadsheet manager, that was not going to get you very far. People will go out of their way for no money to do the right thing when they're cared about. And if they feel like they're not cared about, they won't do anything for even more money.
As a competitor, do you love winning or hate losing?
Oh my God.
Chris, welcome to What Makes You Tick. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited, even more excited because we've also got Rich here today. So Rich, welcome as well.
I'm here to lower the bar and make this good.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'll look to exceed that just by a little.
So Chris, what makes you tick?
Oh, good question. There's probably a few things that make me tick. So I'll break down a couple. I'm competitive. So what makes me tick is getting up in the morning and challenging myself. Physically, I wake up 5 a.m. I'm on the road running by 5:30 in the morning. That gets me rolling. If that doesn't make you tick, if you're not ticking by the end of a long run in the morning, something's wrong. Challenge myself and the way I conduct myself on a day-to-day basis. Rather, that's, contemplative studies into philosophy or looking to get better at my own personal craft or my meditation and my spiritual practice. Those things make me tick as a person. What makes me tick in my professional career is helping others get what they want. Rather, that's a sales rep who's got a goal of, buying a home in the Bay Area, which is, talk about high bars. That's as high as it gets. Or, it's one of my prospects who wants to make their fleet safer, or potentially move up in their career as well. So those are the things that make me tick.
As a competitor, do you love winning or hate losing?
I have gotten way better at loving winning over time. My girlfriend of the last year has been very blunt with me about what a poor loser I am, which I completely disagreed with. I was like, I didn't have a temper tantrum. I was just quiet. Yeah. But I've had to enjoy just some things I do where I don't mind losing, and I'm okay with not winning, which isn't really answering your question. But I absolutely love winning. That's the most important thing. And as long as I am learning along the way, like I competitively or at least semi-competitively run long distance, I'm not placing first overall. I'm competing against myself. So winning can mean a whole lot of different things, whereas losing is fairly definitive and defeatist. And certainly in sales, you lose deals. But I think as long as you're learning along the way, you get some sort of a win.
I absolutely love that. And I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier about helping people to get what they want. What's one of the earliest things that you can remember where you helped someone to get what they want? And that was like oh, this is great. I actually really enjoy this.
Yeah. I'd say early in my career in the 2008 recession, that's when I started smack dab in sales. I was with a cohort of individuals who could not keep a stable job. You'd go to a company and they'd run out of money overnight. And we all banded together and helped each other out. And I actually helped place a former customer into a new role at a company and saw their career take off. And I actually thought I would go into recruiting because it made me so, they were so grateful. I've never had a customer that I've sold software to call me back, send me messages, put me on the Christmas card list for decades. But helping somebody out and finding a new job so that they can pay for their family and the Christmas and the vacations and all the things, that's a lifetime of reward. So that was probably the early on for me.
I love that. And what is the problem that you solved?
As an individual, there's a few things that I solve. Like as a leader, there's a few things that I specifically solve for those who work with and for me. The first is helping them actually become, substantially better by aggregating marginal gains. So giving them a few tangible things that they can do to get better. That helps them solve the key and core components without making it something too big that they can't really go out and solve individually. You look at a salesperson, we talk about that winning or losing. It is a mental game. You watch, it's no different than baseball. You can see a Hall of Famer go games without getting on base. It's definitely a mental game. You've got to break that down for them little by little. And that will help them get to where they need to get. That will help them get better. On the customer side, helping them get what they need. There's a few different aspects of this. I think one that we don't really take into account is most people who we are selling to, unless they're the CEO, this is a job for them. It might be a career. They might be super serious. And there's certain companies and cultures you'll sell into where they're kind of indoctrinated and they're like drinking the Kool-Aid. Most people want to get home to their family. And if you start with like how they actually perceive their job, what they're trying to accomplish. Former company I worked for, Motive, we'd sell to, DOT professionals, Department of Transportation. So they're doing compliance things. We had been trying to sell this deal forever. And it's usually one person at a medium-sized company who's got a ton of responsibility on their desk. And we're like, all right, so you're doing all these, we're giving them all this ROI, thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars in savings. And you could just see it not hitting home. But we found a specific automation that took a task from like days to minutes. It was really that much of a change for them in the technology. And the simple question of like, what does that help you do? Well, I get out of the office earlier. Okay, why does that matter? Well, my daughter's in basketball and I haven't seen one of her games all season. Boom, deal closed just like that. The ROI helps her sell it to her boss, but for her to be passionate and convicted about it, it was getting home and seeing her child's basketball games. And for me, that's like way more satisfying. Like as a parent myself, I'm like, oh, that's a total win. Yeah, I would be very upset at myself and I would beat down the door with my boss to get them to buy something with whatever ROI if I knew it helped me get home. So interesting. I think you got to look at the challenges from a couple different perspectives.
The way that you've described that in terms of the ROI, everyone sells ROI, right? Everyone, and I'm sure pretty much if people start using ChatGPT to go and create their value propositions, which any new salesperson's doing now, I'm kind of short-circuiting the chance to actually go and speak to customers and understand what value is. Then we all go for ROI. And you go to any company's website, it talks about ROI. It's really like corporate. And every tool's promises it increases productivity and it increases returns. But that way of looking at things in terms of there is a human here who we need to turn into a champion. And if we can help them to do something that they care about, that's uniquely valuable to them, then we're different from everyone else that's just spitting the whole ROI story. Where did that idea come from?
Earlier in my career, I'd say when I was at a company called Riverbed about 2012, I had taken a lot of technical certification courses. Again, early in the career, 2008 recession, maybe I'll be a sales engineer, maybe I'll be a recruiter, couldn't sell stuff, thought about a lot of different things. It helped transform the way that I worked with my prospects. I didn't need a sales engineer on the deal. And this isn't a direct path, right? But you start to find your way when you start to negotiate, when you start to speak with the customer from their side of the table, all of a sudden you're on their side, you're working together and you're working with the forces that are the company that you need to work with, your employer and their employer, and you become a team. And when you build that relationship, when you've earned their trust, whatever that is, through the relationship, for me early on, I wasn't great at relationships, but I could talk about, IP protocol and stuff like this and, earn their trust that way. You start to get that tick comes in where you'll find out the thing that's going to get them to the place that they're going to actually start to advocate and become a true champion for you. And that could be something personal in their career where they want to move up. It could be something at home. They might be trying to save their job, or you find out that they're really just super risk adverse and they're on the edge of losing their job and you need to disqualify the deal, which is a whole other side of like, okay, this is actually a bad decision for you. Like, and this is where you earn a lot of respect and you actually get referrals too. And you'll earn more deals from telling somebody, this is actually a bad idea for you right now. Let's go ahead and part ways. And I think that once you get the confidence to do that as well, then you can actually negotiate from the side of the table, because you can't fake. Once they know you don't care and you're a jaded salesperson, then you've completely lost that. And that also runs into your reputation.
You mentioned that you couldn't sell anything, I think was the words that you used.
That is exactly correct.
How did you go from that to being very good at sales? What was that? What were the things you had to learn?
Oh my gosh. So many things that I had to learn in life. Well, I'd say, when I started in SaaS sales, there weren't these like nice onboarding programs and like a ramp and like you got paid for ramp and they gave you these nice KPIs and like a leads list and all these things. Like they gave you a phone and said, go figure it out, FITFO, if you know the acronym. And I was a great SDR. Like I could book more meetings than anyone else, but I couldn't close for nothing. And I lacked a lot of confidence along the way. How I learned was actually I hired a sales coach, one of my best friends at this time in my life. One of the best sellers I've ever worked with. His name's Thornell Washington. So if he happens to see this, I got to give him a shout out. He introduced me to a legendary sales guy in California, Kevin McGinnis. I had no money. Kevin, like VP of sales, sold some of the biggest deals in at that time, telecom sales history in California. Got on the phone with me and he's like, well, you got to pay me something. And I was like, I can give you like $30 for an hour. And that was like money that I needed at the time. And he's like, all right, $30 an hour. We're going to show up and we're going to run you through sales. We're going to run you through. We're going to just we'll do a role play. We would do a role play and I would just completely crumble on the phone. I'd just like, please make this stop. And he's like, no, this is it. Like you have a daughter at home. You need to make this sale. You need to like stay on. So he brought me in a lot of confidence, but he also taught me spin selling, which is incorporated in a lot of other programs. It really helped me out. And my first telecom, / internet service provider job was with a company called Paytech. And they had a wonderful training program. And I went into the training program as the youngest guy in the office. Everybody would tease me. Get picked on, and I graduated number 1 in this. They would send you away for like 2 weeks and go through this training program, and I finished first. And I used elements from what Kevin taught me. You learned what they called Paytech sales technology, PST. I can't believe I still remember that. For some people, it's PTSD, depending on their experience with it. And I would track all this stuff myself. We didn't have Gong. I would record calls in my voice memo app, and then I would go through and I would notice like, oh, I'm talking like 20% of the time and they're just like spilling the beans and I got all the goods, right? So that's those things started to come along the way. I also had at that same time, I had an amazing mentor who I teamed up with from a company that Paytech had acquired her. She just retired. Congratulations to Lori Robbins. She is the classic pit bull in a china shop, the most aggressive. I was like, I am so weak as a salesperson. She is like making me uncomfortable with how aggressive she is in this sale. And they love her. And they said no like 17 times and then gave her the deal. Like maybe I need to try harder. I learned so much from her. So really, I was raised by a tribe of elders and they did a wonderful job putting me through the trials and a lot of hard work on the other side. And I'm very grateful for them and I've tried to give back along the way.
I'd love to know, Chris, what you took from each of those people.
Oh, geez. Well, from Lori, I think, it was pretty self-explanatory of just how to be aggressive, in the sale and really ask for the business concisely. Like, what do I have to do to win the deal today? What is it going to take? And getting them to that point where they actually tell you what you can do to win the deal. And if they don't, then you don't have a deal, and you got a whole other thing to figure out. And she was really great at really cutting to that point for me. On the Kevin side, he brought in, a sales methodology for me, where I was like, okay, now I know where I need to go next. Because when you're early on, you don't have a methodology. You just get promoted up to account executive, and they're like, go get it, Tiger. You're like, okay, I did a demo. Can I have money now? And I didn't really have the core structure built up. I didn't even know what an implication was or a need to pay off, which are these things that started to then transform that. How do I negotiate on their side of the table? The Paytech sales technology, what it brought in was like another level of process where my note taking and what I would share with the customer in terms of like my own business case, how I understand you, made me seem so much, not probably seem, but actually much more professional than my peers who might be selling in, these are commodities like internet service provider, telecom. Like you might be a little faster, less latency, but like you're competing AT&T, Verizon, Paytech, like it's all the same sort of thing. So that relationship speaks out. And then rather you have your act together because they know like, how is my onboarding experience going to be? So they brought in this great framework where the way I would share how I understood their business, what their requirements were, how we were going to manage the project post sale made me really stand out, because at the end of the day, that decision will ultimately come down to trust. And if they experienced buyer, they'll trust the relationship, but they'll trust what you have down as far as showing your experience and your ability to execute at the end of the sale. So I think all three of those, if I was going to take those three buckets between, Kevin, the Paytech sales technology, and Lori, I think that gave me a great foundation to work off of.
I wanted to go back to something that you said about aggregating marginal gains. From your experience, what are some of the common marginal gains that you see that will make a massive difference if you can get those right?
Like there's simple things that I think reps miss quite a bit that are true, that they hate their manager for, but they should probably listen to them. Like BAM FAM, book a meeting from a meeting.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, like I can't help you. Like you've got to do that. These people are busy. They've got other things to do. I as a buyer, as a sales professional, flake on salespeople. It happens. I get a billion emails. Like I miss internal emails because I get so much junk, I think that is incredibly important as like just a tactical thing. The other tactical elements are the way that you speak, the filler words that you use, the amount of time that you spend talking on the phone, which will be indicative of if you're starting to click into the process. I'll give you an example of an early rep at Samsara. They would say the kinda, sorta, likes, like drive you nuts. I mean, they kind of sort of like said it a lot. And I would do a little checklist. And I was like, how many times do you think you said kind of? Just the word kind of. On the call, they're like, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, like 67 times. 67 times. Here's my checklist. And they were like, oh my God. I'm like, it's okay to have a pause. It's okay to give a second between when you speak. Some of the greatest orators of all time speak slowly. I'm not a slow speaker. You've seen that. But they give a little bit of a pause along the way. It shows confidence. It shows that you're collecting your thoughts. That the other elements will start to come in. They will get a lot better. And then the last part is like for me, and this is a little bit more of the philosophical / strategic side, is you just ask yourself, why and so what? All right, why are they going to buy this product? Well, because they need dash cameras in their trucks. So what? If you can't answer the why and so what, like then you've missed the implication, you've missed the ROI, you've missed the why it matters to them as a person, you missed the why it matters to them as a company. So you've got the filler words, how you speak, the rate of speech, how much time you're talking on the phone. You've got the other elements along the way that I think will really help out on your process. And if you do those things, I think of those 3 buckets, you're doing pretty good overall.
One of the things that you've walked through is how you grew as a salesperson. What about how you grew as a leader?
There's many evolutions to that. Dun, 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 the pandemic, working remotely, working with everyone who's going through a mental health crisis. As a leader early on, I tried to like be an extra salesperson on the team. My first team I managed at Riverbed, they were all 10 years older than me, 6 more years closing experience. Most of them were like, why did Chris get this job? Which was a great question, but I got it. So, nevertheless, I just tried to be as effective in helping them as possible. We like before it was called RevOps. We had an operations person who was doing a lot of the RevOps stuff for us at the time. So I could bring in some data elements, things they weren't thinking about. You're talking about a team that like was always happy doing 85% of quota. And then, for whatever reason, it worked out. When I managed them, we always did at least a little over 100%. We never got crushed, but like we were always a little over 100%. So that process, it worked for me. But I wasn't really teaching people how to fish. I sort of burned out on that at Samsara early on. Like I was slinging, like you always wanted me in a deal. Like I was the closer, the king closer in the deal, come in and do it. But then like everyone was dependent on me. And we're talking like that's a company that went from like 2 million to, 170, 200 million in a couple of years. So we closed like 1,000 logos over a few quarters, really. And that didn't really sustain itself. And I had to cut that system off. It's this sales welfare system, for lack of a better term, where I had to let the reps go out and fail and accept that I was going to lose some commission probably, but that it was going to be a more sustainable long term. And then you get into like the enterprise sales. Like, what is it going to take? How are you going to work with an operational sale where you're working with potentially up to 20 different buyers? You've got a lot of false champions, a much more complex sale. Talking about like a really detailed business case where you're helping them start to craft their internal sales process on their paper, their documents. Super important. Selling with from Nate in Australia has been incredibly powerful for me in the last few years in enterprise sales. And I'd say the last element is like, how do you have a team environment and like cohesivity? Like I was like when you're remote and all remote all the time, and you're not like probably traveling. If I was traveling 75% of the time, I would feel it a little bit more. But I felt like that was an element that was really hard to get my head wrapped around for the first few years. People were a lot more touchy. You couldn't be really stern because you didn't know them in person. So like if you gave them stern feedback, they would crumble and quit or complain, or, you get into the microaggression stuff and all these things where it's like, well, can I even give feedback? And, I think we've evolved and software sales past some of that where you can be more blunt as long as you've got the relationship. And it taught me to be more delicate. And especially in the last few years as head of sales, I've done way better in being like, being more compassionate to my internal resources who maybe they don't work in this fit folk culture. They don't need to just go figure it the freak out, and historically I would get rather impatient. I would be pretty tough on my internal resource, and that might get something done once, but that second or third time they're like, oh God, here comes Chris.
It's Chris again. Yeah.
So one of my best bosses of all time from Motive, Doug Mooney, he was just a master at this. And, he might lose a battle, but he'd win the war on internal stuff. And when you get up to senior management, like that's so important. And how you thread that needle with how your team perceives you, because you don't want them to think you're a pushover and you're just playing politics. You got to let them know your hand a bit. I'm like, well, this is why we're doing these things. I think I've gotten way better at that overall. We've recently adopted a tool I will just briefly give a lot of kudos to called Nooks. They call it a parallel dialer. It dials a bunch of phone numbers at once, but they have a virtual sales floor. And for my team, that has been fantastic. They can see me cold call. So I still cold call as a head of sales. I actually won our spiff. Not that it's all about winning, but I did win our spiff for most meetings booked. And like it just made things like really fun. So creating, no matter what your circumstances, creating an environment where you can keep things fun and keep the team working together with that healthy amount of like smack talking, super helpful. Like that's been transformational for us.
I love that. I love that you're the leader that would still lead from the front, because everyone talks about leading from the front, but keeping your teeth sharp. So my old CEO said to me once, don't let your teeth go blunt from chewing on grass. Keep your teeth sharp. And I was like, it's such a good point. And there's definitely been points where I have spent too long in boardrooms and not enough time speaking to customers. So when I started my business, it was really important for me to just be really involved, listening to people. Doing this podcast is all about like learning from people who are on the front line, doing the dirty work, getting the operations done, executors. Apart from actually just going and doing the job and showing you've still got the skills and all the benefits that shows your team, what are some of the other ways that you've kept your fingers on the pulse as a leader to make sure that you're relevant and that you're effective?
I let my sales reps come up, give them a lot of control to come up with the ideas, and let them have the power to make change, because I also know that I don't know. So when I know when I don't have my finger on the pulse, and you can come up with the dumbest things to do as a leader that maybe appease the board, and the reps are like, why are we doing this mindless garbage? And it's true. And you've got to when you're buying, when you got to know when you're buying your own BS, and you got to empower the team to come in and say like, all right, I don't know, what do we do? Like where are the next good ideas? And the best ideas, the best things I've done at Idelic have come from my sales team. They were not ideas that I came up with. And I'll fully give them credit for it.
Could you give an example of one of your favorite ideas that your team's created?
Well, Nooks as the automation, like our outbound was it was crap. We started with I'll pick on some of the cadence tools. I won't call them out by name individually, but you know them. And they just weren't working. All of our numbers were marked as spam. The SDRs were completely complacent, dependent on them. Their outbound numbers stunk. You even look at the benchmark data. It's like year over year since these tools come out, SDR team production has just gone down. We got rid of it, and I just had us dial from our cell phones, and it was better. Our connect rate went up, our meeting rate went up, but it wasn't generating enough pipeline for us. And I was like, and I had one rep on my team who came up with the Nooks idea, and he's a Gen Zer, and he will not like me saying that, but he is a Gen Zer. Because he's an old soul, he's a boomer in heart. And I was like, well, what do we do? And he's like, well, we need efficiency, we need automation. And I'm like, you dang kids, and you're needing everything done for you. And I was like, all right, uncle, I give up. And he's like, well, there's this thing called a parallel dialer. I'm like, we call those predictive dialers. I know what that is. I used to sell those things. You just came up with a new name and added AI. And he's like, well, check these couple tools out. We ended up landing on Nooks. And I was like, oh, we booked more net new meetings and created more qualified opportunities in a 60-day period than we had done in the trailing 6 months. And I was like, oh. Wow. And I was like, full credit to him. Caleb is his name, Culverhouse, one of the best reps human beings I've ever worked with. Young guy who's transitioned to enterprise sales and smashed it as an individual. And without that, I wouldn't be able to say to the board or any potential investor, we have a chance to hit our number because of these reasons. And now I feel very confident in that. Whereas before I would have been probably modest to we'll see. We have we would have had a real pipeline problem without that idea.
So another question that comes to mind, Chris, is a lot of people I know who are sales leaders or founders in businesses where it's still sales-led growth. They don't have the beauty of, a huge amount of inbound demand and product-led growth. All say that outbound's getting harder. You talked about how since these tools came out, success rates and connect rates have dropped. AI is getting better at flagging spam, automation's just scaling failure, all these problems that we know exists. You're someone that's consistently found ways to get net new and to make net new growth happen, which is the dream of all businesses who are just relying on their existing stack and, getting obsessed with NRR. What are some of the things that you've learned that make outbound something that you can rely on and that you can scale when other people find it so difficult?
Well, I think there's no other option but to do outbound. Like you're talking about keeping your teeth sharp. I mean, there's a point when you need to like call, scream uncle and try something different along the way and change your strategy. But you can never, as a salesperson or as a leader, give up on outbound. It always needs to be a core skill for you as a professional at any point in time. Because ultimately, the number's going to fall on you and you're going to need to have an answer for it. And if you've missed your number as a rep or as a leader, and you're absolutely doing everything you can, which always includes the things that are controllable and that is in your control. Outbound is always in your control when you are in sales, when you're in a go-to-market function. There's like no purpose in complaining about marketing or what other people have not done for you. What have you done for yourself? How have you gone out and done that? What kind of personal discipline do you have? When you lack that, you lack any kind of backup to say, like, I've done everything possible and no one else could have done more. So if you're a leader at a company and, the average tenure for a VP of sales is pretty short, it's because if you're not even in the trenches, if your team's not doing that stuff, you can't back that up. Number two, I think on it is it comes down to discipline. Once a team stops doing outbound, they're not disciplined. Plain and simple. Like there's no accountability in there. And it doesn't need to be every day. You don't need to discipline is not next step notes in your Salesforce opportunities, guys. No, that's just not discipline. Discipline is going out in there, whatever that outbound motion looks like. And I'm happy. I've always given my reps, I'm like, dude, if you think going out on the road with business cards and going door to door, go old school, have the old ideas be better again, works for you, go do it. Going to shows, absolutely. Go out and schedule 10, 15 cold call drop-ins if that's going to be it, and that's more effective for you to generate qualified opportunities than to make 100 outbound dials. All that stuff, totally great, but you need to be disciplined. We need to hold ourselves to the standard, no matter what else is going on in the economy, if it's a recession, if the other teams are doing crappy, if the board numbered this, that, or the other. And if for any other reason, even if you think this isn't the sales job for you forever, you go get the dream sales job and you go there and they actually hustle. Like it's going to be real hard to go from I don't run to I'm running a marathon tomorrow.
That's amazing. Because you talked about that, obviously waking up at 5 a.m. and going for your runs. And I know that we were talking in the green room before when we first spoke about the fact that you're doing trail running and, running up 2K incline against 16-year-olds. So you've built that discipline yourself. And I totally understand it. If I don't go for a run, I start to feel mentally quite cloudy and I get fat. And I struggle like every I'm being serious, right? I can see it in my face, like genuinely fat. I'm not even talking about like mentally, I'm talking about physically fat.
Yeah. I'm very aware of the same problem.
All of these things stack up really quickly around you because it is a habit that if you allow it to be a negotiable, i.e., it's something I do to fill in a gap plan. It's like something I do to make up a number rather than this is a fundamental thing. I do not leave the office until I've made that many dials. I do not, go and do this activity, which is maybe like a nicer thing to go and do until I've gone and done those dials. And I was just wondering what's your view, your mentality towards baking into your reps' culture and their DNA, this non-negotiable behavior that they show up and show that discipline around outbound.
Yeah, I think it has to be something that the team agrees on and that you have to come together as a group and decide to be this way versus enforce this way. Every team that I've ever been a part of has had some goofy name. At Idelic, the sales team were the Ducks, were the Mighty Ducks. The classic story from the 90s.
Yeah.
Flying V, we've been selling into trucking and transportation during a recession, very difficult stuff. And you start to build that identity along the way. So we brought in a book club, Jocko Willink, wonderful author, whatever command forces for the United States military, his book Discipline. And we just did our SKO a couple weeks back. And the team decided what their discipline was. All right, how are we going to act and how are we going to hold each other accountable? And when it's their idea, they came up with it and they gave me permission as well as their peers to give them crap when they're not doing it. as well as me. If they see me not doing it, call me up. Like, I'm not above being called out as a leader. You should feel comfortable to call me on my crap when I'm not holding myself to that. Because if I'm not, they're for sure not. If I'm skating out of the office early, they're leaving the second they see, in the old days, the car pulls out of the parking lot, they're all peeling out.
Yeah.
But when the team decides how they're going to function, what their culture is, and that is always rooted in discipline in sales, because that is what it does ultimately come down to, then they opt into it, and it's a lot easier than just enforcing it and trying to be a tyrant, which just doesn't work.
I love that. You've touched on a few incredibly powerful things there. One about identity. When I joined my old CEO, who's an absolute master in all things NLP, as well as just being a world-class entrepreneur, we were looking to improve the feedback culture within the business, because people were getting quite defensive or shirking the responsibility to actually go and give people corrective feedback that was going to help them, like being kind to be soft, which just never works. And he talks about how you can't make a change until someone at an identity level wants to be that person. Yep. You can't change someone's identity and the way that they see the world. And that's not only true for individuals, it's true for teams. So the fact that you've created this environment where teams are creating an identity, they're creating their set of values and their principles, and what happens if we don't live up to those things, I would imagine that becomes an incredibly attractive place for the right people to join your business. So I'm just wondering, when you're building this identity, how are you using that to become attractive and to select people to join your team from outside?
Yeah. I think when your team is doing really well, and you're trying to attract outside talent, you're gonna hire the right people 80% more of the time, because you're not going to be in a desperation mode. Same principles will fall in line, where your team, whether it's a team lead or one or two people on your team, are going to interview them. And if they don't think they're A players, that they're going to fit in and make the team better, not cronies, right? Because you can fall into crony world pretty easy. Like, they're just going to, look like Chris, have a beard, and run at 5 a.m. Like, we're not hiring everybody who's like that, right? We want to hire people who make us better as a group. And you're going to attract those people into the business. And when they hear the kind of standard that you have, the kind of discipline that you bring in, and again, I'm not like, if you're not on Slack at 7:30, like I'm calling your cell phone. I'm not doing that kind of stuff. We're adults.
Yeah.
Like my guys have, they have children and stuff, so I'm not doing, like, it's also comfortable. There's also a good, healthy work-life balance along the way. I will say, just to self-promote myself there in the right light. People who don't want to work hard, or who are afraid of that, or who know that they're not ready for it, will automatically select out along the way. Yeah. I'd say, just as a caveat to that, in the pandemic world, if you're hiring a highly paid professional to be either a senior mid-market or an enterprise salesperson, get on a plane, or get them on a plane and meet them in person. And I'd say 99% of the hires that I've made a mistake on, I would not have hired if I'd have met them in person first. Sure. And they might have even self-selected out. I think that's incredibly important. They'll also see that, like, I'm a short guy and I'm pretty normal, and you look very different over a Zoom, Yeah. But I think that's incredibly important.
Yeah, I agree. We make it a fundamental part of our process that people meet in person for all of those reasons. You get a completely different steer. I remember hiring people remotely from Germany when we ran like an outsourced go-to-market agency, and we'd do it on a phone call. And then some people turned up and you were like, what on earth have we done? They changed country. But I really like that. I've got a principle, or a model, very simple way of describing recruitment. I'll just see if it lands with you. So here's how I talk about recruitment with clients, to help sure we've got like a common language. So recruitment's very simple, not easy, but simple. There are 4 types of people you can hire: adders, subtractors, multipliers, and dividers. So you've got adders who are your like steady ship, we're just going to make sure things happen, really steady, but they're not going to revolutionize your business, not innovate, not really question too deeply, just make stuff happen. Subtractors, wrong hire, low skill, low will, low effort, low alignment, get them out. Dividers, highly intelligent people, often highly skilled. Maybe they got promoted a bit too far and they start to lose the alignment. Maybe you've mismanaged them. They lose the alignment and they start to divide and conquer and create their own factions. And then you get the multipliers, who is, you could call it the star or the A player, but they multiply everyone else's impact with their energy, with their drive, with the innovation, the ownership, the challenging that they bring to the team. And what I realized is that multipliers want to work with multipliers. And they're such good people that if you don't manage them in the right way, they can become dividers, or they could become even worse, which is a multiplier who tries to pick up the work of the other people in the team.
Interesting.
And they're going to burn out super quickly.
Yep.
So this idea that you would create this environment where the multipliers are just doing such a good job that other people would be attracted to that might be because they've come from an environment where they're sick of picking up the slack of some dividers and subtractors. And they just want to work with elite people who are going to go and push them forward, and with a manager that's going to go and get the best from them. And I'd just love to hear what you think about that.
I absolutely agree with that. I'll use something that fits into this bucket is when I worked early days at Samsara, everyone there was over quota. And we all hired people from Meraki who everyone was over quota by a substantial margin. Their philosophy was to have the majority very far over quota. And thus we would interview individuals from outside of that sphere. And if they didn't immediately say that they were over quota and fit this certain like on paper bucket, we would immediately dismiss them. And I think what we ended up doing, this is my philosophy, thinking this through live with you, is I think we ended up with a lot of dividers who came into the organization, and even worse, subtractors who on paper hit their number at a company where everybody was hitting the number or lying on their number with good backup. How many people have I interviewed have actually told me that they consistently missed their quota out of the thousands of interviews? Almost none. I don't know, maybe a handful out of thousands. But what I found was the most impactful and powerful was I wanted somebody who had gone through, didn't have to live in adversity. I didn't want somebody who had a, fatalist or a scarcity mindset, but show me somebody who actually, you said, they were already carrying the load. Some of my best hires were in very tough companies where I was like, yeah, I did 90% of quota for 3 years, but I was number one in the company.
Yeah.
That's a whole different mindset. Because as a sales rep, if you don't hit 100%, you've in your mind failed. But to be number one in that position means you're carrying the weight in a lot of other places. And you just if you put that person in an environment in a place where they can actually thrive and still be that wonderful, helpful multiplier individual, they will thrive.
I love that. Absolutely love that. Another question then, Chris, would be, it's quite dynamic where people would be on that chart, right? Whether they're multipliers, dividers, subtractors, adders, people go through various stages. Life happens, like you're saying, during the pandemic, people can just be having a really tough day or a tough moment. I'm just wondering, as someone who's a formidable sales coach and then really loves the coaching side, what are some of the things that you do to get the very best of people and try and get them to stay in that multiplier mode, even when things outside of their control might be affecting their performance?
The senior leader that I worked with the longest, my truest mentor, I've not mentioned. Her name is M.J. I followed her from Riverbed to NGINX, and she had a team that would not quit, would not take another job for more money to leave her, because she knew her reps and she knew that they knew, and she knew that they cared about each other mutually as people. And you absolutely cannot fake that. And you cannot make somebody better if you do not know what's really going on in their life. And you cannot fake caring about somebody over a long period of time. They will know the second that you are backstabbing them or making a really political decision. So how you keep somebody a multiplier is actually go to bat for them, actually learn and care about what's going on in their life. If somebody's worked for you for 2 years and you don't know their significant other's names, their kids, their dogs, when their birthday is, those problems, right? And they know that stuff and it shows up, and that will keep them from being a multiplier. Your job as a sales leader in 2025, you better get right on psychology and empathy and actually care about people and treat them a bit like a family. Because if you're a spreadsheet manager, that was not going to get you very far, not as a frontline leader, at least. And it's not going to help people be a multiplier, because people will go out of their way for no money to do the right thing when they're cared about. And if they feel like they're not cared about, they won't do anything for even more money.
Yeah, and I think that's just such a beautiful way to end, and such an amazing challenge. So, Chris, thank you so much for being on the podcast. We've really enjoyed. Yeah, and thank you for what you've shared. It was amazing.
Good stuff. I appreciate it, guys.
Thanks so much for joining us for the What Makes You Tick podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed having the conversation.
Yeah, there's so much value in hearing other people's career stories. And if you're someone focused on growing in your own career, check out our Growth Magnet newsletter on LinkedIn. We'll put a link in the show notes.
And we will see you on the next episode.